Mrs. Catherine, one of the wealthiest women in the country, always worried about her children's attitude toward their inheritance. Knowing that death was near, she prepared a special surprise for the reading of her will, with the aim of ensuring that her children wouldn't act out of self-interest when it came to dividing the estate. When she passed away, they became extremely anxious to receive their inheritance, but they never imagined that Mrs. Catherine was several steps ahead of them. Mrs. Catherine's mansion stood imposing against the gray sky of that autumn morning. Her 3 children, Robert, Sarah, and Laura, waited in the living room, where time seemed to have stopped since their mother's passing. Antique furniture and heavy curtains bore witness to decades of a luxurious life full of stories, now silent in the absence of their matriarch. Robert, the eldest, a determined businessman, watched impatiently out the window, his hands in the pockets of his perfectly tailored suit. He didn't hide his irritation with the wait. "I hope that old Mr. Stephen arrives soon. I have more important things to do than sit here," Robert said, his voice tinged with impatience. Sarah, his middle sister, a renowned lawyer, looked up from the documents she was reviewing and cast a critical glance in Robert's direction. "Robert, Mom wasn't just about money. She always valued justice and equality. We're here to ensure her wishes are respected." Laura, the youngest of the 3, remained quiet on the sofa, observing the exchange of words between her siblings. Her brown eyes reflected a contained sadness, but also a serene determination. Unlike the other 2, she had inherited from their mother not only compassion, but also a more detached view of material wealth. Before Robert could respond to Sarah's rebuke, the door opened with a soft creak, revealing an elderly man with white hair and a serious posture. It was Mr. Stephen, Mrs. Catherine's trusted lawyer for more than 3 decades. He carried a worn leather briefcase and looked at the 3 siblings with a mix of respect and sadness. "My deepest condolences on the loss of Mrs. Catherine," Mr. Stephen said in a grave and serene voice. "She was a remarkable woman, and I'm very sorry for her passing." The 3 children nodded silently, each absorbing the lawyer's words in their own way. "Let's get straight to the point, Mr. Stephen," Robert interrupted, clearly impatient. "What's in the will? How much money are we talking about here?" The lawyer adjusted his glasses and took a deep breath before responding. Mrs. Catherine left very clear instructions on how she wanted her estate to be distributed. "Please have a seat, and let's discuss the details." The tension in the living room of Mrs. Catherine's mansion increased with Mr. Stephen's serious presence. He stood before the deceased 3 children, holding a worn leather folder with the gravity of someone who carries not just documents, but the weight of his longtime client's last wishes. As the children settled around a marble table, Mr. Stephen began to describe the provisions of Mrs. Catherine's will. Each word echoed in the room, blending with the silence heavy with the contained emotions of the heirs. "Ladies and gentlemen," the lawyer began, his grave voice echoing through the silent hall, "we are here to read the last will and testament of the late Mrs. Catherine." His dark eyes scanned the faces of the heirs, noting the mix of anticipation and tension in their expressions. A heavy silence hung in the air as Mr. Stephen carefully opened the folder. Every movement was calculated to heighten the ceremony of the moment. Robert, as impatient as ever, nervously cleared his throat before breaking the silence. "Well, let's get this over with. How much does each of us get?" His voice carried a tone of authority mixed with anxiety. Mr. Stephen raised a hand, silencing Robert with a firm look. "It won't be that simple. Your mother's will contains special conditions." Sarah, the middle child, exchanged a significant look with Laura, the youngest, whose calm expression contrasted with Robert's evident impatience. Sarah then looked back at the lawyer. She was already beginning to speculate about what special conditions might mean. "What exactly does that mean, Mr. Stephen?" she asked, her voice carrying the seriousness of a lawyer accustomed to deciphering legal enigmas. The lawyer adjusted his glasses on his nose and replied slowly. Mrs. Catherine had a very particular vision of how her fortune should be distributed. Beyond material aspects, she also left clear instructions about the impact each of you could have on the world. "Everything will be explained shortly," said the lawyer, leafing through some papers. "Prepare to hear their mother's last wishes." The three siblings exchanged confused glances. Laura was the first to speak. "Yes, Mr. Stephen, we are ready." With a solemn nod, the lawyer began to read the words carefully written by Mrs. Catherine. "My dear children," he began, "if you are reading this, it is because I have left this earthly life. I know that you all expect a fair division of my fortune, but there is one last wish to be fulfilled." Robert then interrupted. "What is she talking about?" Mr. Stephen gave him a serious look. "If you allow me to continue, Mr. Robert, everything will become clear." Laura placed her hand on Robert's arm, calming him. "Let him speak, Robert. We must respect Mom's wishes." Sarah agreed, though she seemed concerned. She pondered silently for a moment. "Mom always had her reasons. Let's hear the rest." The lawyer cleared his throat and continued reading. "My fortune will not be easily divided among you. Instead, you will have to prove your worth through 2 challenges I have prepared. Only those who successfully overcome both challenges with honesty and integrity will be considered worthy of inheriting my fortune." After the shocking revelation of the will, a stunned silence hung over the hall. Sarah was the first to break the ice. The 3 siblings exchanged perplexed looks. Robert was the first to speak again, clearly impatient. "Challenges? What kind of idea is this? Mom always liked to complicate things. What does she mean by challenges?" asked Sarah, her voice trembling. "She can't be serious, can she, Mr. Stephen?" Laura raised an eyebrow, thoughtful. "Yes, this is quite unusual. Did she mention anything about this before?" The lawyer solemnly nodded. "I am afraid your mother's instructions were clear and binding. She established 2 challenges that will determine who will inherit her fortune." Robert slammed his hand on the table, his face red with anger. "This is ridiculous. I want my share of the inheritance now." "Calm down, Robert," Mr. Stevens said firmly. "If you want the inheritance, you must fulfill your mother's wishes." Robert huffed, clearly dissatisfied. "This is absurd. Mom always had her. But this is too much." Laura looked down at her hands, silently absorbing the magnitude of her mother's demands. She had always known Mrs. Catherine had high expectations, but this exceeded anything she could have imagined. "I didn't expect this," admitted Sarah, looking at the lawyer with a mixed expression of uncertainty and determination. "But if this is what Mom wanted, then we need to consider it." Mr. Stephen nodded. "You have time to think and decide how to proceed. I will provide additional details about the challenges and the deadlines involved. Please understand that these are Mrs. Catherine's last wishes and must be respected." The silence that followed was no longer just stunned, but laden with the realization that their lives were about to change in unpredictable ways. The fate of their fortunes would not be determined by money alone, but by the challenges they would have to face. Challenges that would test not only their abilities, but also who they were as individuals. Laura, usually the calmest of the 3, looked at the lawyer with a mixture of confusion and concern. "What exactly are these challenges?" she asked. The lawyer cleared his throat and continued. "The first challenge will take place in a dark room. Inside it, there will be 3 identical boxes. One contains a key, another a venomous scorpion, and the third a poisonous snake." A shiver ran down Laura's spine as she heard the ominous words. Robert and Sarah exchanged worried glances. "Each of you must choose and open a box," Mr. Stephen continued. "The one who finds the key will move on to the second challenge." Robert, always impulsive, interrupted. "This is madness. Mom lost her mind before she died." Sarah looked at the lawyer, her eyes showing a mix of anxiety and determination. "Mr. Stephen, this is extremely dangerous. We can't just agree without fully understanding the consequences." The lawyer nodded sympathetically. "I understand that this is difficult to accept, but these are the precise instructions left by Mrs. Catherine. She believed that only by facing real challenges could you demonstrate your true worth." Laura, despite the palpable nervousness, remained calm. "And what if no one finds the key?" "Then you will fail the first challenge," Mr. Stephen replied simply, "and you won't be able to proceed to the second." Robert was visibly agitated, but Laura placed a hand on his shoulder, conveying a calm she barely felt herself. "We need to think clearly and act cautiously. This is a unique opportunity that Mom has given us. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to find a way to reconcile her mother's desire with the sense of responsibility she felt. That's right. We need to fully understand what's at stake before making any decisions. And what if we choose the wrong boxes? Sarah asked, fear evident in her eyes. The lawyer shrugged grimly. Well, then you'll have to deal with the consequences. A terrible silence fell over the group until Robert broke the ice, his voice full of determination. Very. Well, if these are my mother's wishes, we will do as she says. Whatever the challenges, I will overcome them and claim what is rightfully mine. Sarah reluctantly agreed, while Laura observed in contemplative silence. She couldn't help but think there was more behind her late mother's plans. Mr. Stephen rose from his chair, adjusting his glasses on his nose. It's important that you understand the seriousness of these challenges. Mrs. Catherine did not make this decision lightly. Laura finally spoke, her voice calm, contrasting with the palpable tension in the air. Mr. Stephen, you said the boxes are in a dark room. How will we know which one to choose? The lawyer nodded, appreciating the young woman's thoughtful question. Each of you will receive a flashlight. The boxes are arranged randomly, and you will have to trust your instincts. Robert let out an impatient sigh. Let's get this over with. How long do we have to decide? You have until the end of this week to make your choices, Mr. Stephen replied. I will be here to guide you, but the final decision will be yours. Sarah looked at her siblings with a mix of concern and resolve. We need to prepare properly. We can't take this lightly. Laura agreed, her mind already working on possible strategies to face the first challenge. I'm with Sarah. We should consider all options before acting. The lawyer observed the three siblings with a look of deep respect. Remember, it's not just the inheritance at stake here. It's the opportunity to honor your mother's legacy. The silence that followed was intense, laden with the understanding that their lives were about to be tested in ways they could never have imagined. The fate of their inheritance would not be decided by a simple will, but by challenges that would test their emotional and physical limits. Mr. Stephen looked at the three siblings with a mix of respect and compassion. You have time to reflect on this, he finally said. I will be here to answer any questions you may have and to guide you through the next steps. The three siblings exchanged glances, each immersed in their own thoughts as they tried to absorb the magnitude of the choices they would have to make. Then, all three understood at once. We accept. They responded, with Robert taking the lead. We can do the first challenge tomorrow. After the shocking decision to face the dangerous challenges, they gathered in a secluded corner of the mansion, away from the watchful eyes of Mr. Stephen and Laura. We can't let Laura win this inheritance, Robert whispered urgently. You know how she is. She'll donate everything to charity without thinking twice. With her eyes shining with determination, Sarah agreed. That naive girl has no idea what to do with all that money. Mom's fortune would be much better in our hands. Robert nodded. Exactly. We need to find a way to manipulate these challenges to our advantage. Sarah looked around, checking to see if they were really alone. What do you suggest we do? How can we? Don't worry, Robert said, a sarcastic smile curling his lips. We'll make sure she picks the wrong box in the first challenge. We know she trusts her instincts too much. We can influence that. Sarah frowned, worried about the idea of manipulating her own sister. This seems risky. What if it goes wrong? Robert raised an eyebrow. If we don't try, Laura might end up leaving us with nothing. We need to act before it's too late. As the siblings conspired, Laura watched them from a distance, with a growing sense of suspicion in her chest. She had always known that Robert and Sarah had material ambitions, but she never imagined they would plot against her this way. Mr. Stephen approached, interrupting her thoughts. Laura, is everything okay? You seem distant. She forced a smile. I'm fine, Mr. Stephen. I'm just trying to make sense of all this. The lawyer studied her face for a moment, assessing her reactions. Remember, Laura, these challenges are a chance to show who you really are. Don't let external pressures influence you. Laura nodded, but she felt a persistent discomfort. She knew she would have to trust herself more than ever in the challenges to come. Meanwhile, Robert and Sarah continued their conspiracy, determined to manipulate the circumstances in their favor. The inheritance was now not just a matter of the challenges imposed by Mrs. Catherine, but also a betrayal between siblings who promised loyalty but were willing to do anything to secure their share of the fortune. The two drew closer, whispering. Eventually, a wicked plan began to form. In the darkroom challenge, you'll try to bribe the guard to ensure you get the box with the key, Robert instructed Sarah. I'll make sure Laura picks the box with the venomous snake. Sarah smiled maliciously. And if she survives that, then we'll work together on the second challenge. Robert responded with a wicked gleam in his eyes. We'll confuse and mislead Laura until she's completely lost. The longer it takes, the better our chances. The two laughed darkly at the prospect of deceiving their own sister. Meanwhile, Laura watched from afar, her sense of suspicion consuming her more and more. She noticed the secret glances between Robert and Sarah, and something inside her warned her of the imminent danger. Determined to find out more, Laura waited until Robert and Sarah had left before approaching Mr. Stephen, who was reviewing documents in a secluded corner of the room. Mr. Stephen, may I speak with you for a moment? She asked, keeping her voice low to avoid drawing attention. The lawyer looked at her with a gentle, yet reserved expression. Of course, Laura. How can I help you? She hesitated for a moment, carefully choosing her words. I'm worried about the challenges Mom left us. I feel that Robert and Sarah are planning something against me. Mr. Stephen frowned, concern appearing in his tired eyes. Laura, I feared something like this might happen. Your siblings are very ambitious when it comes to money. What can I do, Mr. Stephen? How can I ensure that the challenges are fair? Laura questioned. The lawyer placed his hand on her shoulder, gently. First, trust yourself. Mom chose these challenges for a reason. They aren't just about wealth, but about honor, courage, and true character. Laura nodded, feeling a bit of relief hearing the lawyer's reassuring words. And what about my siblings? They won't stop until they defeat me. I'll keep a close eye on them, Laura, Mr. Stephen replied firmly, and I'll do my best to ensure the challenges are fair. As Laura walked away, she felt a growing determination within her, knowing she would need to be more vigilant than ever. Her siblings could be ruthless, but she was determined to prove that she deserved to inherit not only her mother's fortune, but also her respect and trust. Meanwhile, Robert and Sarah exchanged significant glances of mutual confidence. The plan was in motion, and they were confident they could manipulate the challenges in their favor. The game was just beginning, and every move was crucial in determining who would emerge victorious in the end. The next morning, the three siblings gathered again in the mansion, ready to face the first challenge. The room was dark, except for three identical boxes positioned in the center. Mr. Stephen awaited them with a solemn expression. Are you ready? The lawyer asked, his gaze sweeping over each of them. Robert and Sarah exchanged a conspiratorial look, confident in their dark plan. Laura merely nodded calmly. Very well then, Mr. Stephen said. Please follow me. He led them down a long corridor to a massive wooden door. When it opened, it revealed a small room, completely dark, except for the three boxes in the center. Remember, the lawyer warned, one of these boxes contains the key to the next challenge. The other two, well, you already know. A shiver ran down their spines as Mr. Stephen withdrew, locking the door behind him. Robert and Sarah immediately put their plan into action. Let Sarah and me go first, Robert said with false kindness. We're older, so it's our responsibility. Before Laura could respond, Sarah was already furtively approaching one of the boxes, slipping some bills to the guard in charge of the room, who subtly nodded, indicating which box contained the key. With a nod of her head, Sarah opened the box and took out a small silver key. Look, I have the key, Sarah exclaimed triumphantly. Robert then turned to Laura with a forced smile. Why don't you try the next one, little sister? Innocently, Laura approached the box that Robert indicated with a nod. She reached out to open it, but suddenly the door burst open and a familiar figure rushed in. It was Frank, her late mother's best friend, followed by the lawyer, Mr. Stephen. Stop everything, he shouted. I have proof that you two are cheating. Frank held a video device, from which emerged the recorded voices of Robert and Sarah conspiring their wicked plan. Laura's eyes widened in shock as her siblings remained confused. "Your mother foresaw that you two would try to cheat," Frank said, shaking his head in disappointment. "She asked me to install hidden cameras and monitor everything. The real purpose of these challenges was to test your honesty and morality." Robert and Sarah were speechless, shame burning on their faces. Mr. Stephen entered, glaring at them with contempt. "It seems that the inheritance will not be yours after all," the lawyer said coldly. Meanwhile, Laura looked from one sibling to the other, tears shining in her eyes. Their betrayal hurt her deeply, but she couldn't suppress an even greater sense of disappointment. "Your mother was right all along." Frank approached her with compassion. "Laura, I'm sorry that you're going through this. Your mother trusted you to do the right thing." Laura nodded, still processing everything that had happened. "Thank you, Frank. At least now I know the truth." The lawyer cleared his throat, breaking the tense moment. "Laura," he began, "you are the only one who demonstrated integrity in this test. As per your mother's wishes, the fortune will be yours." Laura blinked, barely believing what she was hearing. "But what about my siblings?" Mr. Stephen shook his head. "They will not have any right to the inheritance, according to the specific clauses of Mrs. Catherine's will." Robert and Sarah remained silent, facing the consequences of their greed and dishonesty. There were no more arguments to be made. Laura felt a mix of relief and sadness. She would inherit her mother's fortune, but the price of her siblings' betrayal was too high to celebrate. Faced with overwhelming evidence of their treachery, Robert and Sarah were confronted with the devastating consequences of their actions. Mr. Stephen approached them with a mask of disappointment on his face. "You two should be ashamed," the lawyer reprimanded them. "Your mother trusted you to act with honor and integrity, and yet you conspired to cheat from the very beginning." Robert tried to justify himself, but his words came out weak. "We just wanted to ensure that the inheritance went to who really deserved it." "Shut up," Sarah interrupted, turning to Frank, her eyes pleading. "Please, there must be some mistake. We didn't intentionally betray Laura." Frank sighed, looking at the siblings with a mix of pity and disgust. "The evidence is clear, Sarah. You two were caught in the act." Mrs. Catherine left no room for doubt about the purpose of the challenges. Mr. Stephen consulted the papers in his briefcase before continuing in a firm voice. According to Mrs. Catherine's will, any attempt to manipulate the challenges would result in automatic disqualification from the inheritance. "You have lost all rights to any part of it." Robert clenched his fists, frustration and anger boiling inside him. "This can't be happening. Laura doesn't deserve more than we do." Laura demonstrated the true essence of the values your mother cherished. Frank intervened, his expression serious. She was honest and faced the challenges without trying to manipulate them. As the discussion continued in the dark room, Laura stood on the sidelines, observing everything with a mix of sadness and relief. She couldn't believe the depth of her siblings' greed, but she also felt a twinge of gratitude for being recognized for her integrity. Finally, Mr. Stephen approached her with a gentle smile. "Laura, as per your mother's wishes, you are indeed the sole beneficiary of the inheritance." Laura nodded silently, thanking the lawyer. A new shock spread across Robert and Sarah's faces as Laura let out a small sigh of surprise. She had never desired this fortune. "But this can't be right," Robert protested, desperation clear in his voice. "Laura didn't even want the inheritance." Sarah joined the protest, tears streaming down her face. "Please reconsider. We'll do anything for another chance." Laura looked at her siblings, her heart breaking. Part of her longed to take revenge on them, but her innate sense of kindness stopped her. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward. "I accept the inheritance," she said calmly, raising her hand to silence Robert and Sarah's protests, "but with one condition." Mr. Stephen and Frank exchanged surprised looks. "And what would that be?" Mr. Stephen asked, his voice reflecting curiosity mixed with skepticism. Laura thought for a moment, carefully considering her words. "My siblings will have 1 year, during which they will be closely monitored by Frank and Mr. Stephen. If, at the end of that period, they demonstrate a genuine change in their attitudes, then we can reevaluate the inheritance situation." Wow, but a year is a long time, Robert protested. But Mr. Stephen raised his hand to silence him. This is a generous gesture by Laura, the lawyer said, looking sternly at Robert and Sarah. Accept this opportunity with humility if you truly wish to make amends. Sarah dried her tears, her face showing a mix of gratitude and determination. We accept, she said firmly, looking directly into Laura's eyes. We will prove that we deserve another chance. Robert reluctantly agreed, realizing he had no other option. Very well, he muttered. Laura smiled, a weight lifting from her shoulders. Then it's decided, Mr. Stephen agreed, satisfied with the resolution. Frank and I will ensure that this probationary period is fair and rigorous. Frank agreed, placing a hand on Laura's shoulder with gratitude. You've shown true greatness today, Laura. As the siblings left, each lost in their own thoughts, Laura knew that the coming year would be crucial. She sincerely hoped that Robert and Sarah could find the path to redemption, for deep in her heart, she still wanted to believe in the family they had once dreamed of being together. In the days that followed, Laura took control of the vast businesses and fortunes left by her late mother. As she adjusted to her new responsibilities, she constantly reflected on the chance for redemption she had offered her siblings. Robert and Sarah. One day, as she was reviewing some documents in her office, there was a knock on the door. Come in, Laura called. The door opened, and Robert hesitantly entered. His eyes were downcast, and the remorse was evident on his face. Robert, with a mix of compassion and caution, his green eyes, usually so firm, now showed a glimpse of vulnerability. She knew that this moment was important, not just for him, but also for the family's future. I wanted to apologize once again for my actions during the challenges of the will. I was consumed by greed and lost sight of what really matters, Robert murmured, his words heavy with regret. Laura pondered for a moment before responding, carefully measuring her words. I understand, Robert. What happened was painful for all of us, but I believe that people can change if they are genuinely willing to. Robert agreed, his expression showing relief mixed with anxiety. I know that my words may not mean much now, but I am determined to do the right thing from now on. I want to make amends, Laura. I want to prove that I can be trusted, that I can be part of our mother's legacy in a positive way. The sincerity in Robert's words touched Laura. She had seen her brother as a ruthless competitor, often willing to sacrifice principles for personal gain. But there, in that moment of vulnerability, she saw a side of him that he rarely showed. I believe in second chances, Robert, Laura said serenely, but I won't make it easy for you. If you truly want to be part of this legacy, you'll have to prove your sincerity with concrete actions. Our businesses and charity projects require integrity and commitment. With determination, I understand. I don't expect it to be easy, but I'm willing to work hard and regain everyone's trust, Robert replied. Laura smiled slightly, in a gesture of encouragement. Start small, prove yourself every day, and if you need guidance or help, I'll be here to support you. Laura then studied Robert for a few more seconds, with a penetrating look, pondering his words and the sincerity in his eyes. She had faced many challenges since inheriting her mother's business and fortune, and Robert's presence at that crucial moment could signify a turning point for the better, both for him and for the family. I accept your apology, Robert, but actions speak louder than words. You need to prove that you've changed, Laura said firmly, maintaining her resolute stance. Robert nodded vigorously, his face expressing genuine determination. I know, and that's why I'm here. I would like to join you, work on one of your projects, honestly. Surprised, Laura raised her eyebrows. Are you serious? You always despised my charity work. Robert lowered his eyes for a moment before meeting her gaze with sincerity. Yes, he admitted, blushing slightly, and that was a terrible mistake on my part. Your work is noble and makes a real difference in people's lives. Please, let me help. Laura studied her brother for another moment, assessing his words and the emotions behind them. She saw a genuine change in Robert, something he had never shown before. A small smile curved her lips, a mix of hope and caution. Very well, brother. I'll give you a chance, Laura finally decided. But at the first sign of dishonesty, it will be your last. Robert agreed earnestly, grateful for the opportunity. I understand. I promise not to disappoint you. With that, he left Laura's office, feeling a mix of relief and determination. Robert knew it wouldn't be easy to regain her trust and prove his own change, but he was willing to face the challenge. As Robert walked away, Laura reflected on the possibilities and challenges that lay ahead. She had taken on not only the responsibility of the family business, but also the role of guiding her siblings on a path of righteousness and integrity. It was an immense responsibility, but she was determined to do whatever it took to keep her mother's legacy alive and strong. In the weeks that followed, Robert devoted himself entirely to one of Laura's social projects, building a school for underprivileged children. Laura closely monitored, watching Robert work with renewed determination. One day, as she was walking through the construction site, she encountered Sarah. "Laura, can I talk to you?" Sarah asked hesitantly. Laura agreed. "Of course, what's up?" Sarah twisted her hands nervously. I also wanted to apologize and accept your offer of redemption. Seeing Robert working so hard inspired me. I want to do the right thing this time." Laura's smile widened. "I'm glad to hear that, Sarah. There will be a place for you here if you truly want to redeem yourself." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she hugged Laura. "Thank you for this chance. I won't disappoint you again." Laura looked at Sarah with tenderness. "I'm here to help rebuild our family, Sarah. Together, we can make a difference." As Robert and Sarah strove to redeem themselves, Laura continued to manage the business with wisdom and compassion. The school was rapidly taking shape, driven by the hard work and renewed passion of everyone involved. As the days passed, they became a united team, dedicated to realizing their mother's vision. However, not everything was simple. The path to redemption was full of challenges. Robert struggled to break free from his old habits of manipulation and greed, often tempted to follow his selfish impulses. Meanwhile, Sarah found it difficult to rebuild her self-confidence, questioning whether her sincere actions would be enough to make up for her dark past. Laura faced her own dilemmas as she balanced her new responsibility with the need to guide her siblings. At every step, she recalled her mother's lessons of integrity and compassion, trying to be the example her siblings needed to follow. In the months that followed, Robert and Sarah dedicated themselves intensely, working alongside Laura on her social projects. Little by little, the bitterness and greed that once consumed them began to fade, replaced by a new sense of purpose and satisfaction. Every day, they grew closer to the children who benefited from the school they were helping to build, and every child's smile was a powerful reminder of what really mattered in life. Laura watched her siblings with pride, amazed at the transformation she witnessed. It seemed that as they faced challenges and rediscovered the value of generosity and honest work, Robert and Sarah were also rediscovering themselves. Conversations about financial strategies gave way to discussions about how to improve the children's education, and the competition between them was replaced by genuine collaboration. On a sunny day, as Laura strolled through the school gardens, she saw Robert and Sarah participating in activities with the children. The two laughed together, helped paint murals on the walls, and distributed school supplies. The sight warmed Laura's heart, reminding her of how far they had come since that fateful day of the will reading. At dusk, when the volunteer work ended, the three siblings gathered in the school administration room. Sitting around the table, they exchanged looks full of gratitude and mutual understanding. "I can't believe how things have changed," Sarah said with a sincere smile. "Laura, thank you for believing in us and giving us this opportunity." Robert agreed, his serious expression now softened by a lightness that hadn't been there before. "You showed us the way, Laura. I never imagined I could feel so fulfilled." Laura smiled, feeling a mix of emotions. "You two did all the hard work. I just offered a chance. It's incredible to see how you've embraced it." The trio shared a moment of silence, absorbing the magnitude of what they had achieved together. Their mother's legacy, which initially seemed like a shadow over them, now shone like a beacon of hope and renewal. "I know we can't change the past, but we can shape our future," Robert finally said, looking at his sisters with determination. "Let's keep making a difference here. I promise we'll never lose sight of what really matters again." Sarah agreed, with a determined expression on her face. "And we'll never stray from the path of integrity again. This school is just the beginning." Laura felt a lump in her throat, deeply touched by her siblings' words. "Mom would be so proud of you," she murmured, her voice choked with emotion. "You are truly her legacy." And so, united by the transformative experience of redemption and their dedication to the greater good, the three siblings moved forward. After a year, Robert and Sarah had demonstrated a true change, and thus received their share of the inheritance. Together, the three siblings continued to lead not only a school for underprivileged children, but a promising future and a new family foundation built on true wealth, generosity, compassion, and honesty. So, did you enjoy the story? Thank you for joining us. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment below with your thoughts on the story. See you next time.